Okay, for the last couple of evenings I've been in the process of stripping off just about as many components I can lay my hands on. I've been stripping the front suspension steel coverings that were covered in Hammerite and original paints. I've done the exhaust mount, the tops of the shock absorbers and the bottoms of the shock absorbers where they were covered in black Hammerite. Tonight's job is to move on and carry on stripping paint. Some of this I think will be more difficult. Some of this stuff is like stove enamel, so I think anything that was originally black, like the number plate mount, the ignition switch mount, which has just arrived from Canada, and the kickstand and stuff may be a little bit more tricky, but I'm going to continue using paint stripper, get as much as I can off as possible, then any stubborn bits will get got with the wire wheel. Here's an example of a part that's been paint stripped and has spent about 20 hours in electrolysis. It has still got some staining and patina on there, but the wire wheel should just finish that off quite nicely. So considering how rusty that was when it first went in, that is looking pretty good. So I've got high hopes of that painting up nicely. Tonight's job is to start pulling the airbox apart. I don't know if it shows up, the light's really bad tonight. There's quite a lot of rust on the outside, it's all surface rust of this airbox. Unfortunately we're going to lose this sticker, but it looks like the factory didn't put it on straight anyway, so no great loss there. So in case of pulling the rubbers off, pulling the element out, I'm going to have to remove the heat shrunk plastic off these tabs. Otherwise the rust will lurk underneath those. I'll replace that heat shrink later on, and I'll have to remove this foam padding, which again is something I should be able to replace if I can't save this piece later on. So tonight's job, paint strip this, and then once that's done, at some point during the week that'll have an electrolysis bath as well to get rid of the rust. Okay, the airbox may have to have special measures because this air filter section does not detach, it's permanently bonded, and I think they've used a resin, sorry you can't see, and I think they've used a resin in here, and I don't know what the effects of electrolysis will be on this resin, so I think what I'm going to do is carefully use paint strip around the outside perimeter but avoiding getting anywhere near that. And again on the outside here I'm going to, let me zoom back, and again on the outside here I'm going to use paint stripper to get rid of the paint, but after that I think I'm just going to have to use a wire wheel to remove any surface rust as best I can, and then possibly phosphoric acid rather than electrolysis. I really don't want to unbond this cage here, and secondly the paint on the inside of the filter is in really good condition, so I don't want to blow all that off and then somehow have to spray paint the inside of that. So I think we're going to try just using wire wheel and phosphoric acid on it. It'll be a bit more time consuming and fiddly, but you know, I think for a piece like this it's worth being careful. We have a rubber seal that runs around the perimeter, and this is actually quite old and feels quite fragile. It's the sort of thing I'm not sure you'll be able to replace easily, so that'll get a clean in hot water at some point before reinstallation. On the bottom we have rubber mounts with metal bushes in. The metal bushes, I've learnt the Sharpies are the perfect size just for shunting these out. So we've got 3 metal bushes. Okay, the airbox has been paint stripped as much as possible. All that brown is the rust that is on the surface. And I've carefully stripped the paint. Again, you can see a lot of that is just brown muck, which is the rust, but I've tried to avoid stripping inside. So I'm going to wash these in water now to rinse off the stripper. Some parts in the electrolysis bath. These bits have been cooking, well, one of them's been cooking kind of like a good, I put it in this morning I think. So this is the exhaust mounting bracket You can see the corrosion that's still left on there, but it's turned black, which means that the electrolysis is doing its thing. More importantly, I've got the, what is this? This is the toolbox. Now I didn't bother paint stripping this, I just wanted to experiment by putting it straight in without paint stripping. It's been in for about 3 hours, and already I can see actually that the electrolysis is doing its job. This was completely corroded, whereas you can see already, the light in here is terrible by the way, you can see already that the paint is shedding and the rust is starting to go. You've got silver again. I'm quite pleased with that. It's just 3 hours of sitting there. There's still a lot of paint still on it, so I'm going to leave it in overnight, probably for a good 20 hours or so, and we'll see what happens. If the electrolysis doesn't strip the paint, which it often does, I will use traditional paint stripper and then come back. But I have high hopes that the electrolysis will do its job on this. It's Friday afternoon. The parts on the table have been paint stripped. 3 of them have been through the electrolysis process. The kickstand I'm not going to bother because that is going to need regular repainting. So they've been degreased. They've been wire wheeled after they've been through the electrolysis bath. They have now just been degreased with the U-Pole fast drying degreaser, and now it's time for some etch primer on these parts. Parts have come up pretty well. Don't know how good the lighting is. It's quite bright today, but you can see the rust treatment. The electrolysis has done a really good job. I mean, all the rust has been removed from the pores, but you can see the corrosion patina. That's better. You can see the corrosion patina on there left behind where it's been sat for 40 years in a barn. I'm hoping that the high build primer I put on later on will cover up the worst of that. It's too fine to bother with the 2-pack filler, and this part, to be fair, is hidden. This face is hidden underneath the airbox. The airbox has been through the electrolysis. It looks disgusting at the moment, but that black sludge is actually rust that has been converted, and there's powdered rust on there, so that needs to be wire wheeled off. I've started stripping the frame just using paint stripper. It is making some headway. It hasn't taken very long. The previous owner looks like he had rubbed back a lot of the blue original paint and then coated it with Hammerite or Combi Colour or some non-fuel resistant paint. So I thought I'd do this in a methodical manner. Start at the front and work my way back. I'm going to get the black off first, and then as I reveal more of the original paint, I'll tackle that as a separate job. So that's kind of the front end done, and now I've just got quite a complicated bit at the back to do. An hour or so later, and the paint is pretty much stripped off. There's still evidence of the old paint on there. I'm going to wash the frame in water to neutralise the paint stripper, and then it's time to get the wire wheel and the electric drill out and start to clean the frame up a bit better than it is. Get rid of the rust, and then treat it with phosphoric acid in any areas that I think need it, and then hopefully, maybe if the daylight allows, get some primer on there, but the chances are that'll be out the weekend, not now. A good afternoon's work, and we have all the paint off. There is obviously rust patches on there that even the wire wheel won't touch, so I don't know if you can see, but that patina on there is sort of leftover rust. There is an area I can't quite get at, which I'll have to go in manually with something just to get up in there and clean out what I can. But generally the frame's in pretty good shape. I will treat it with phosphoric acid to convert the rust and stabilize it, and then once that's done we'll put a coat of acid etch primer on there, and that should stop any further corrosion before getting around to painting it properly. That is the etch primer on. That should hopefully prevent any corrosion from occurring between now and when I get round to spraying the actual frame with 2-pack. So it should, within half an hour or so, be able to handle it, and I can put it back in the shed and keep it out of the way whilst we get on with some other bits and pieces. I've pretty much done all the paint stripping now. I've just got the swing arm and the bushes to remove, to do a bit of electrolysis on a few parts, and then I think most of the priming is pretty much done. Okay, not the best lighting in here, but these are some of the primed parts. They're all in etch primer, awaiting a 2-pack primer to go onto them. I'm not quite at the painting stage yet, but we're getting there as more and more items join this. At some point next week we should be about ready to start putting some 2-pack paint on. A couple of these bits and pieces I'm not going to use 2-pack on. The footrests I'm not, and the kickstand and the main stand are not going to get 2-pack on, and the reason for that is these items get rusty very quickly irrespective of what paint you use on there. They're out in all weathers. So if I use a standard black metal paint, it'll be easier to strip and redo at a later date. Much easier to maintain than having to get rid of 2-pack paint. But everything else in black, like the airbox and the other half of the airbox, which is somewhere, that will be black. There's the other half. That'll be in 2-pack. And somewhere there is a toolbox. That's that hanging up there. That'll be in 2-pack. So that'll give us something to do.